Hi, today we're going to install a set of coilovers on a Z34 370Z. So, as you probably know by now, I'm into racing. If you decide that you're going to modify your race car, you should ask yourself a couple of questions before you get started. The most important thing is, what problem is it that I'm trying to solve? Now you can look through a parts catalog, and this happens to everybody. You start seeing all kinds of cool shiny parts and things that look great, but unless you're specifically trying to fix something that's wrong, you probably shouldn't modify your race car. Some of the reasons you might modify your race car, safety is always a good reason if you're going to get into racing or drifting, to have safety in mind. And it's also important to think of your car as a system. Everything interacts with everything else. Say you put a custom steering wheel on your car, now your airbag no longer works and it's part of a system. Say you get a 4-point racing harness or a 5-point racing harness and you don't have a Hans device. All of these things, they work as a system. You could make making things worse instead of making things better. Every modification that I've made to this car behind me has been for some specific reason. One of the big problems I've had to address on the car is the lack of adjustability in the suspension. The alignment has been a real problem, so I've purchased parts to be able to adjust the alignment. Another problem I had was the back end of the car was coming way too loose exiting a turn. I did some research and found that a larger front sway bar can remedy that, and sure enough it did. In installing a set of coilovers, I'm trying to solve a problem. The problem that I'm having specifically, actually the car handles really well. The problem I'm having is entering a low speed turn, I have to slow down more than I think I should to be able to carry that. I'd like to be able to carry that speed through and not have to slow down quite as much. So what I'm going to do is effectively increase the front spring rate to try to mitigate that, and also have adjustable dampers so that I can determine how quickly the car takes a set. So that's the goal of this exercise. I'm going to increase the front spring rate by about 3 kilos, from about 9 to about 12. And the back I'm going to leave basically the same, but I am going to add some adjustability in case I want to adjust ride height. If I can lower the center of gravity, that would help, because there's 3 things that really help with your dynamics of your car and how weight transfers. One of them is how wide the wheels are apart. Another one is how low the center of gravity is to the ground. And I can't off the top of my head think of what the third one is. The second thing that you need to consider when you're going to modify a race car is the rule book. You can make one modification to your car and throw it into a completely different class. And I'm trying to stick within the rules of one particular class, which in this case is Street Touring Unlimited. So one of the rules, I looked up the suspension rules in Street Touring Unlimited so I don't run afoul, and I found out that the suspension components all have to be in the factory location. The problem with the Z, if you go with coilovers all the way around, is that the rear suspension is set up in 2 different locations. You have the damper located separately from where the spring is. So to stay within the rules in STU, I had to buy a coilover kit that actually has a damper and the spring in the factory locations, which really limited me, but I have found a good solution. And actually I found a really great solution in BC Racing. What I like about it is this is the spring that I'm replacing my factory spring with. So it has a piece in the bottom that allows you to use the factory spring perch. Then it has a standard size coil, so I can adjust the size of my coils using parts that are available off the shelf. And then there's an adjuster on this which allows me to alter the ride height. But there are very few kits that are manufactured and designed this way, and this was one of them. So that was a deciding factor in why I chose BC Racing coilovers. Well, let's get started. So while we're in here, one of my rules for buying a race car is to get it with as many of the parts from the factory as you can that you aren't allowed to modify once you get the car. A prime example is this front strut tower bar on my Nismo 370Z. The special thing about this bar is it is triangulated into the back, and what that does is add a huge amount of stability to the car. Now the rule book says if you want to add one of these and you don't have one, it can only brace on the near side and the far side and is not allowed to triangulate. So since I bought it from the factory that way, I can have it. Now the struts themselves are actually underneath this thing, so I'm going to have to remove it first. Now we can see the top of the factory assembly. So that's what we're going to remove. So one of the first things we're going to do is disconnect the sway bar. The sway bar links the left and the right side of the suspension, and anytime you're working on something involving springs, you're going to run into problems trying to get things put back together if your sway bar is connected. So a couple things I forgot to mention. One is that when you are removing the sway bar, you want to have both ends of the car at the same height. Otherwise, you're never going to get the sway bar removed. So you should do that probably before you do just about anything else. It helps to have a couple of ramps to run the car up on to get under there to get the sway bar off. Second thing I forgot is we need to measure the ride height of the car before we get started, so we have some basis on where it should be when we're finished. And then you can really pick anywhere to measure it from. I'm going to measure it from the edge of the fender here. So I'm at about 6 1/4 in the front. Seven and a quarter in the rear. So the car has 1 inch rake on it right now, which is important to remember. So to get in here and inspect a little bit, here's the existing setup. So I'm going to remove this upper control arm to gain access. Down below it looks like I've got ABS wire and a brake line on the other side that I'm going to have to just loosen up. There's a space for them on the new kit. We'll see how that works out. And then down below there is one bolt there in the bottom. It's actually connected to the end link that connects to the sway bar. So I remember I said remove the sway bar first, and that's going to make it possible for me to remove that bolt. Otherwise I would have never gotten it out of there. And on the other side, this line here, it's just going to pop off. It looks like it's in there in 2 places. Okay, that's easy enough. 3. Any more? Something that's really important I found out after previously owning some Cusco A-arms is that the most important thing about owning an A-arm is being able to easily and quickly adjust the camber on race day. If it's taking you a half an hour and a lot of aggravation to get your camber swapped out, then you probably chose the wrong part. Look how easy that is. I'm going to give it 2 turns now to get it back to factory spec, because I had it loosened up, or I had more camber added because I was out racing this the last time I drove it. And we're ready to go on dismounting. I think I'm going to get rid of this bottom bolt first, and then we'll pull it out. Looks like it's going to need some probably an impact wrench to get that off of there. hate to do that for very long because I've got a rubber bushing on one end and I've got a gas shock here. Hopefully this will help. There we go. 3 12mm bolts on the top. I don't know what purpose this serves, but we'll leave it on there. Be careful not to mess with the ABS line as we get this out of here. It's only 3 years old, but it's lived a very harsh life. So let's take a look at the new coilover. It's a little bit shinier, but there's a couple important differences here. One of them is that it's adjustable. The damper is adjustable. I can easily swap out springs if I don't like the spring rate that I put in there. And the ride height is also adjustable. Tighten that off once I get it on there. So I'm putting a jack down here and hooking up the bottom bolt just to get a little bit of tension on that to make it easier to install on the top. Now I'm going to try to install this piece of steel back on here. I think I have enough room. If nothing else, it gives these nuts a firm base. There's going to be a lot of pressure exerted on that sheet metal right there. We want to give it the best fighting chance we can. And that's all there is to it. You'll notice that there's a different wheel on here. This is my this is just my street tire setup, and it looks like it might already be maybe a little bit lower. It's only one corner that's dropped, so it's not really showing that 1 inch drop. But I am still concerned about getting the jack underneath it. I'm going to put some blocks underneath so that when I put the jack under the car the next time, I won't have any problems getting it out after I'm done. It's a good idea to have a tap and die set around your shop, because sometimes you'll run into a nut or a bolt or a hole that's just not right. And if you clean it out, it'll save you trouble in the future. I'm just going to run this through, clean up those threads. part of the problem is the bolt, even though I waited to tighten all these, the bolt's still rubbing a little bit on the strut tower bar. And I think that's why it's not real happy. But we'll fix that right away. You know, there's a lot of things that people don't have in their shops when they're just getting started. It takes years to accumulate all these little tools. But tap and die is a really important thing to have. You want to make sure that you get symmetric ones if you are working on a Japanese or European vehicle especially. Put a little bit of oil on this bolt just to help it. And that should make a big difference. So I already have the damper assembled on here. I was running it for a little while with the factory spring because they're approximately the same length, and it's not going to be any more work to put them on sooner than later. It took me a while to get my springs in that I wanted to run. First thing we're going to do is get this collar loosened up. And once we do that, we're going to want to shorten this a little bit, and we'll take a look at how to do that here in a few minutes. First of all, I'm going to get this off completely. Dealing with spring-loaded stuff is great fun. The easiest way to tackle this is to go ahead and put a separate jack underneath part of it. Theoretically. There we go. Take this out. And here's something I've learned. Up here you've got the top spring perch. There's about an inch of rubber in there that's isolating that. So when you're measuring how long your spring needs to be, you have to take that into consideration. If you forget about that, you're going to end up an inch too short. A lot of debris will get in this cup, so you want to make sure you clean it all out before you mount the new perch in there. Look at all that. So with this new kit, I already did some measuring on this and figured out that I want to make this perch as tall as possible in order to get within an inch of the factory setting. I'm going to pretty much max that out so I still have all my thread on there. And I'm not going to forget this little guy here. This whole assembly is just going to mount right in that bucket. Again, the reason I'm doing this is that the rule book that I'm following says I have to have the same style set up. This came from the factory. And this is the only way to do that. I'm going to slowly ride this up so that I can get it to mount on these tabs that are on the top here that you can't see. But they're in there. So once those are in, I'm going to loosen just a little bit until I figure out that the spring is no longer really loaded. It's going to be about there. And then I'm going to give it, according to the factory specs, or the specs for the coilovers, I need about 3 millimeters to 5 millimeters of pre-tension. The other thing I have to do is get this damper to where it's stretched out just about right to meet where my bolt hole is. So to do that, I'm going to turn this top half until it lines up. Okay, so I've tightened everything off, and we should be all set to put that tire back on again. So this is 1.5 inches that I did with a hole saw, and you can see the damper adjuster is in there. And what I'm going to do is get a cap, a little 1.5 inch vinyl cap to cover that so it doesn't look so bad. So it will be adjustable. Well, there it is. Box is empty. The old parts are out of the car. The new parts are on the car. Car's looking a little bit lower than it was before. In fact, if I go to put my hand under, there's definitely less wiggle room on all corners. We'll check our ride height. Now we're sitting at 3, which is a little bit lower than I would like. Not sure that we're going to clear too many speed bumps like that. We're looking at 4 3/4 in the front. About 6 in the back. Compared to our original measurements, 4.5, 6 1/4, 7 1/4. So we have gone down significantly. And we might not be done, because overnight this car is going to settle a little bit, and it might come back even lower. And even then we're still not done, because we have to align it, take it out for a test drive, adjust the dampers. So there's a lot ahead. Probably want to raise it up a little bit to get that front end off the ground so I can clear some speed bumps. But that's going to be it for today. Before you set out on the road, you need to make sure that your alignment's right. Now, for ordinary people, this means taking the car to an alignment shop. But when you fiddle about with your car as much as me, you end up buying some specialty tools again. Right now I'm sitting at an 1/8 of an inch toe in on here, which is pretty ideal for me. The camber is a little bit off, I'll have to adjust it, but that's okay. I already checked the front, and it has just a tiny bit of toe out, which is fine if you want your car to be able to react quickly going into a turn. It makes it a little bit more jumpy. This is a camber tool. Now, if you don't already have some aftermarket adjusters for your alignment, you're going to need them, because when you go dropping the car, you're going to find that these various bolts don't have enough play in them for you to get your alignment right. So you have to buy some new ones. One of the easiest ways to do that is to get this camber adjustment bar, but when you do that, it automatically also adjusts the toe a little bit for you, usually in the direction you didn't want to go. So then you have to buy some other alternative, which in this case I bought these camber bolts, eccentric bolts, which have a wider hole for your adjustment. And you'll see I had to rig this one to hold it in place permanently in one position because they do have a tendency to slip. Now the last thing I'm going to have to do here, of course, is to reconnect my anti-sway bars. So I'll get on that as soon as I get done tightening this off. The chew test is out on the autocross course. The car is stable. I can enter turns faster. I can exit turns faster. Now the car is where it needs to be. I need to raise my limits as a driver. That's why I'm going to Evolution Phase 2 school next weekend. From there I'll be able to find the new limits of the car and push myself even harder and hopefully work for that 1,000 packs in STU. Thanks for watching.